Night of the Spadefoot Toads, Chapter 6, Part 2. Really, Gloria, the other woman snaps, you're being pig-headed. It's best for both of us. 15 houses jammed up next to mine is not my idea of what's best for me. It won't be the same, and Thomas loved this land as it was, not with the roads and houses. Oh, you act like they're going to put a nuclear waste dump here or something. Tabitha's voice sounded agitated now. I could stop this, Mrs. Tibbets said. Don't you dare start with that again, the other woman snaps, her voice rising. I could, though. If you call the state about this, the woman sputters. Really, Gloria, this is not your decision, and anyway you need the money more than I do. Look at this house. It needs painting. I know very well what it needs. I'm only trying to help. It's help I don't really want, Tabitha. Oh, it's no use trying to reason with you. You are so stubborn. No more than you, Mrs. Tibbets says. There's a pause. Ben can feel his heart beating so loudly he's afraid they're both going to hear it. The other woman speaks again. In the end, it's my decision, really. Legally, this is my land, and I'm going to get the best price I can for it. You'll get your share, as Tom requested in his will, and then you can decide on what you want to do with it. And remember, I legally don't owe you any more than that, and I'm just honoring what my brother would have wanted. Ben can barely hear his teacher's response. Well, whatever you're going to do, you're going to do. I wish you wouldn't be like this. I'm afraid it's just the way I am. Come inside and I'll see if I can find the papers. Ben hears the front door close. Mrs. Tibbets seems to have forgotten about him. He's breathing hard like he was in the argument himself. He wanders around back. He thinks about exploring the woods again, but he doesn't want to get too far away from the house in case Mrs. Tibbets comes looking for him. He opens the door of the tool shed and a crack appears inside. Nothing but garden tools and a big pile of empty plant containers. Outside again, he wanders over to the back of the shed. The cage is underneath the lean-to is partially hidden in the shadows. He edges closer. It's made of wood and a wire tightly woven into half-inch squares. A plywood wall marks off a small corner in the cage. It looks some kind of a shelter area with a small entrance. He tries to peer into the entrance, but it's too dark. Don't go near the cage, Mrs. Tibbets had said. What kind of snakes are in there? Ben shakes the cage a little to see if he can get anything to come out. There's no movement. Maybe there's still nothing in there at all. But then why did Mrs. Tibbets tell him to stay away? Ben looks around on the ground and finds a skinny stick. He pushes the stick through the wire into the hole into the nesting area. He twists and wiggles it gently inside the hole. Ben hears a car motor start up on the other side of the garage. He pulls the stick out and flings it onto the ground. He runs around the side of the house and smacks into Mrs. Tibbets, almost knocking her over. Oh, she says. Sorry, says Ben. What were you doing back there? Mrs. Tibbets says. Her voice is tense. I was just walking around, looking at stuff, Ben says. It's a horrible answer. You weren't bothering the snakes, were you? Ben shakes his head. No, I wasn't. He feels bad about lying, but nothing happened, and he doesn't want her to be mad. You have to promise, Mrs. Tibbets says. Don't go near that cage. She puts her hand to her chest, like she's trying to calm down. She lets out a breath. I'm sorry if I yelled, but it's very important. They're not to be disturbed. Do you understand? Ben nods. Mrs. Tibbets rubs her forehead, and then without a word, she turns and heads toward the house. Ben follows her through the back door into the kitchen. It's a small room with a table just big enough for 2 chairs. A cardboard box overflowing with papers and files takes up most of the surface on the table, and 2 more boxes just like it are sitting on the floor. Sorry about all the mess, Mrs. Tibbets says, not looking at him. I was just going through some old things. She picks up one of the boxes and carries it out to some other room. Ben's heart is still pounding from his teacher's scolding. He looks at the box on the table. Balanced on top is a stack of black and white photographs. He sits in one of the chairs and leans in for a better look. Some of the pictures are yellowed and curled up on the edges. He guesses they're old, probably as old as the photos in his grandmother's family album. Ben listens for the sound of Mrs. Tibbets' footsteps. He only hears a faint scraping in the back of the house. He takes a chance and flips through a few of the pictures. Groups of people, relatives probably, posing at a holiday time or standing by the beach or leaning against old cars. Then one of a boy and a girl catches his eye. The boy looks like he's about 8 years old, younger than Ben is now, and the girl looks around 6. They're sitting on a large rock, squinting into the sun. The boy, his face all scrunched up, is holding something away from himself, like he's not really sure he wants to touch it. Ben can't tell if he's laughing or upset, maybe both. He peers at the object in the boy's hands. It looks like some sort of a toad. The girl has something too. Her long, curly hair hangs down over her shoulders, but Ben can see that she's holding an even fatter toad under her chin. She's laughing. He flips over the picture and sees someone has written in a kid's scrawl, Tom, me, and the Overtoad. He looks at it again. He doesn't notice when Mrs. Tibbets comes back into the room. That's Thomas, my husband. Startled, Ben drops the photo on the table. Who's that girl? He asks. It looks like Tabitha, she says, hurrying to the refrigerator. How does chicken salad sound to you? Fine, says Ben. Neither of them says much during lunch. Maybe I should have gone to the birthday party, Ben thinks. The walk in the woods was fun, but now everything feels strange. You did good work today, Mrs. Tibbet says, handing him an envelope. Ben peers inside. $15. That's too much, he says. Oh, no, it's not. It's what you earned. Okay. Ben folds up the envelope and puts it in his pocket. Thanks. With barely another word, Mrs. Tibbet stacks the lunch dishes in the kitchen sink and leads him through the house, out the front door, and back to the car. As she drives him home, she hums to herself, letting her voice fill the space where there's no talking. When she stops the car in front of his house, Ben opens the car door to climb out. Ben? Yes? I'm sorry I yelled at you about the cage. There are a couple snakes... Oh, it's okay. There are a couple snakes in that cage. I shouldn't have them there, really. My husband rescued them from an area being developed, and he was looking for a nature center that might take them. He was a real herpetologist. The thing everyone else was afraid of, he loved. This was just before he died. It was very sudden. I shouldn't have kept them. I know I need to find a place for them. I just haven't gotten around to doing it. What kind of snakes? He asks. She ignores the question. You should never bother them. Do you understand? Ben nods. So enough of that, Mrs. Tibbet says. Thanks for coming. I really needed your help. Ben smiles. He's glad she's not mad anymore. He hates it when adults are angry. He never knows what to do or say. It's okay. Thanks for everything. No, thank you. And maybe we could look for those Spadefoot toads when we get a good rain. Cool, he says. Where'd that come from? He wonders. Ryan again? Cool, Mrs. Tibbets repeats. It sounds funny coming from her. Funny, but nice.